Hi, I'm Natalie Jill, fat loss expert turned lifestyle and high performance coach. Welcome to Listen Up, the podcast. On this podcast, I do what I do best, taking complicated information that is relevant to us now and breaking it down simply with actionable steps you can implement to level up your life. I also regularly interview some of the most inspiring and courageous men and women on the planet who, at their worst, learned how to achieve success greater than anything they ever dreamed possible, creating everything from nothing. If you are new here, I encourage you to go back and listen from episode 1, when this podcast was previously called Leveling Up, for the full transformative experience. Depression, anxiety, even self-harm has been a growing issue the last few years. The World Wide Web and the easy access to social media has quickly escalated this. And over the last 18 months, those experiencing these things has risen to a huge number. In fact, so many people are suffering with these things that there are not enough therapists to meet the demand. More than us being affected as adults, it's actually affecting our teens at alarming rates. Today on Listen Up, I'm bringing on expert Dr. Mcayla Sarno. She's a licensed psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, brain training and mindset expert, and certified Emdr specialist. Most importantly, she is also a mom and someone who is extremely passionate about what she does. She's here to help. Today, I've got one of my favorite doctors on, Dr. Mcayla Sarno, and she is special because she's not only a psychotherapist, a psychoanalyst, a brain training and mindset expert, and certified EMDR specialist, but she was actually my therapist. Me and my husband, Brooks, both did the intensive EMDR sessions with her, which was life-changing, not only for us personally, but for our marriage. So she holds a special place in our hearts. And she's my go-to for some of the questions that I've been having recently. And the most fascinating thing about her is she's also a mom. She's also a mom of teens. And so when I've had questions as of late, she's the person I've gone to. And I thought, instead of just asking them to you privately, let me bring you on here because I know a lot of people have the same questions. So thanks for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So I want to first talk about the obvious thing in the room that everyone has pretty much dealt with over the last 18 months. I don't think anyone has completely not dealt with it. It's just been very present. Is this just alarming rate of anxiety and depression, even with adults, just in general? I mean, do you see that in your practice? I would love some help on sort of what's going on there and how we can even start to help navigate this with people.
Well, it is. It's actually spiked incredibly from in the last 2 years and even more so the last year. But it's spiked, and it's something that a lot of parents, like you said, are wondering what is going on and what has changed. And so it's really looking at not only what we do about it, but understanding what's different in the last year or two that would have prompted or caused the rates of anxiety and depression and suicide ideation to spike so much.
Yeah. So before the pandemic, before everything that's happened in our world, were you seeing an increase in this just due to social media, or was it a night and day when the pandemic hit, sort of this started happening?
Oh, it was about a year before the pandemic started happening.
So I'm interested in what you saw there and what you think has created this change.
Well, I think, you have to look at what's going on in the world, how it's affecting the parents, the adults in the world. If it's not what you tell children, it's what they experience. And if you look at what's been going on in the world, what have been the changes in the last couple of years have been pretty extreme. And so parents have been more anxious. Parents have been more worried. Parents have been more diligent, and kids will feed off of that. So that's how I make sense of it in terms of before COVID and the things that were happening. If you think about how politics has really been so intense, in the last couple of years. So it's kind of nature versus nurture, and you look at what's going on in the environment. And then once around the time the pandemic hit, if you look at the kids had anxiety, they had depression, they had these problems in the past, right? But the rates weren't so high. If you look at kind of from a standpoint of we have predispositions to, whether it's to alcohol or addictive behaviors, we can be predisposed to anxiety or to depression. And then it's like I said, nature versus nurture, and what's been going on in the environment, because kids were surviving before but it's how politics, so to speak, how that's influenced social media, and how it's in our environment, aside from social media, how it's impacted the environment in our household. And so that's what's changed. It's already having a predisposition to something, and that's what brings it out in kids is their environment, what's been going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when I was growing up in high school, I can remember knowing one person that would mention depression. I mean, literally in all of high school, I knew one other teen that would talk about depression, and we thought it was strange. We didn't know. It seems like now it's almost the trendy thing to be anxious, to have depression, to be confused. And I'm certainly not a therapist or a psychologist, but when I try to wrap my mind around it, it's almost because of the world of social media and the quickness of that where you only before had your neighborhood and your high school friends to kind of pull from, now you've got the whole world. So if you as a teen are feeling something, it seems a lot easier to find like-minded people in that same situation. And to me, it's sort of validating that. Is that accurate? And
that's absolutely what's going on. So in the lab, and it is a huge part, is the social media, which is kids already had, the needing to fit in, needing to, the two highest negative beliefs with suicide is I'm different and I don't belong. And because that was already there, the change in our world and the changes that have occurred on social media has been highly influential, because that has changed. I mean, even, the other day, I think Facebook is having to defend themselves because they had done a year-long study to see if the trends and the things on Facebook were influencing teenage girls specifically in a negative way. And they, accordingly to this report, Facebook was aware of that and continued to allow that to happen. So it is the cool thing. Kids have found one place that will help them to fit in, and that is the dread and the doom and the this and that and body image, things like that. And so now you're not cool if you don't have a psychiatrist. If you have an attempted suicide, you're not cool. And you'll see this because when you look at the statistics in different schools, if you've heard of OSHA, Performing Arts School, and 80% of the students there have either attempted suicide, have anxiety, have depression, and are also have, just in that school, embraced a certain gender.
Wow.
And so statistically, if we look at the schools and and we also notice there's a clutter in groups of teens that all of them have the same. So there is a lot of influence to belong, and that's just a place that they've found. And they are bonding over it. And they're also, it's interesting. If you go on Reddit and you look at some of these discussions, it's almost who can out depress the other person.
Yeah.
But on another level, a kid that's really depressed might be trying to motivate the other one. Hope you're going to be okay. Hope everything's all right. And so they're connecting in this very negative way.
So much of this is being hidden from parents. I would love to, it's interesting because I'm very close with my daughter and I get to know her friends. And so I really see this going on with teens. It's like I've noticed it. And I've really been observant of it. And when I talk to other parents about it, it's interesting how a lot of them are not aware of it at first. But when you talk to teens, it's so relevant. What should parents be looking for? Because I know in my audience here, a lot of people have teenage kids and they don't even know, they just think their kid has a messy room all of a sudden, or they're wanting to isolate more, but they're not understanding that this is going on. Any things to specifically look for, and how do we even start to have this talk with our teenagers?
So signs to look for when they're isolating, when you want to go on their computers and scroll through their browsers to see what in the history, what have they been looking at? What are they, what's influencing them there? Major behavioral changes. I think a lot of those symptoms we should be, especially with teenage girls, prior to all of this. Age of 14 for teenage girls is typically when they will either feel anxiety, depression, or feel suicidal. It's that age. But even more so now, what you want to look for is look at their arms, look at their legs, and see if they're cutting, because teenage girls especially will cut, and that's become a major trend.
Yeah. Talk to me about that, because that is definitely becoming a trend. And I'd never even heard of that growing up. I'd never seen that. I'm assuming it was pretty rare. And now it's become this trendy thing. Why do they do it? What is it? What does it mean? And what do we do about it?
Well, I've seen videos on even TikTok where they are being, or you can go on Reddit or Discord, and a child will learn, or teen will learn there's how-to videos, how to cut, how to keep this a secret from your parents, there's so many how-to videos. So what was your question?
Like, why has this become so relevant? Is it because they just see this information out there and they learn to do it? So like, my question is, are they learning to do it? Like, this is something cool to do, so let me do it. Or were they already experiencing it and now they're finding validation that it's normal?
It's the new trend, because before this doom and gloom, it was anorexia. You remember that was the trend. And so it's just, you see these trends, and I don't want to minimize. There are some cases that are going to be truly, valid, or depression, or who knows what's going on in the home or in their lives. But for the most part, in terms of the trend and the rates going back up, it's a place to belong.
So just like when I was in high school, we would see that, especially girls with eating disorders was a huge thing. They would just stop eating, or bulimia. Now you're saying it's just another way of replacing it. They're doing the self-harm.
Right, because you're getting, you're getting positive reinforcement from it, on social media and with their friends. And it'll be another trend after this.
How are parents contributing to all of this? Or is it completely separate? Like, is it a parent's fault if their child is depressed or anxious or even self-harming? Or is it always connected, or is it really fully separate?
Well, it depends on the circumstance, of course. And there's going to be, like I said, whatever's going on in their environment. But, if we can have great relationships with our kids, let's say we've got, the kind of kid where we were always close, that we always told each other everything. During these times, we can't be their best friend. We can't just assume, because for a lot of parents, this was the kid this was my very trustworthy kid. We always had a good bond. We have to do our due diligence. We need to be looking, and being much more aware with what they're looking at online, whether it's Tumblr, Reddit, Discord, TikTok, which they love, YouTube. We can't just assume that our children are going to do the things we tell them to do. Mm-hmm. They're teenagers, right? And they're going to find a way. But we have to be more diligent, be the parent, and it has to be okay that our teen is angry with us. We have to be okay with that, and kind of step up to doing.
So we've got to address our people pleasing, the need to be okay and have the neutral, and then not have them mad at us.
Exactly. We have to be okay with that.
It's interesting you said that. I clearly in my household, for instance, have seen what social media has done. So we've got some pretty strict rules around that, but there's a lot of things that are not off limits that I'm still seeing this trend in, like music, for instance. Music has changed too. And I noticed some of the popular singers with Gen Z, with that younger group, they are singing depressing things. They're talking about depression, anxiety, self-harm, all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's all that influence. And, if you look, Chalk Children's Hospital, the psychiatric unit, and you will see there are clusters of friends in there.
Oh, wow.
During the same periods of time. So it's a trend, and it's a belonging to.
Wow. This is depressing in itself. What do we as parents do? Like, what do we do? How do we help kids? I mean, I'm going to start with, I know they can all go together, but some of them can be separate. Like, just anxiety in general. I think everybody's been anxious over the last 18 months, just some level of anxiety with so much division, so much polarization. What do you advise patients or parents to do about anxiety? Just even starting with that, how do people even know that they have anxiety?
A lot of people don't. Kids do, teens do, especially now. But it's staying connected to your kid, and having ongoing having ongoing dialogue, because we can get so caught up in our busy lives that we can tend to miss it. But we also have to assume teens, especially teen girls, they're not always going to tell us everything. And but if we start to notice signs in our kids, that we might want to put them in therapy for, it doesn't have to be a lifetime, but we might want to set them up with a therapist to see if they'll talk to somebody else if we're starting to see signs with that, and start getting outside support for what they're going through.
What about depression? Is there some level that is to be expected now and considered normal? And when is it dangerous? Like because if they're not telling us, I don't assume most teenagers are not telling you that they're thinking about suicide or that their friends are thinking about it. How do you know when this is an intervention, this is a problem, they need a lot more help than I can give them? How do we know that?
Well, I mean, there's the more obvious, when they start lying more, when they start isolating, when their behavior changes, then we can tell, we can notice that. What was the other part of your question?
Like just how we know and what do we do? Because like if I were to, and I'm not saying, I just think of my daughter's friends. If they're wearing their big hoodie and they're in their dark, like how do I know that's just the trend or they're actually depressed? Is there ways to know? You said, so isolation, obviously, and changing in personalities, but what questions could we ask them, or how do we show up to actually know that we need to get them support?
Well, it's the things you just mentioned. Look for those things when they stop. Teens that are depressed, they might eat more or they might start restricting more. When you're depressed, you don't have an appetite, so it's a kind of assessing: is this real depression or is this part of part of the trend? But it's having those conversations. If we don't see signs of it, if you want to investigate, you go to your kid's browser, go into their history, and start looking at the things that they're looking at. And that'll tell you a lot too.
I've done that. We've been a full FBI agency over here, and it's pretty interesting. It's not fun, but it is very interesting to do that.
Right. And, and that's a huge part of it, going back to social media, which is, even if it's a kid you've always been able to trust and you tell them, okay, I need to know all the sites that you're on or that you belong to, they're likely going to have other sites, other, another Instagram page. And if you notice that a lot of Instagram pages and these teens, they're not using their real name, they're using fictitious names, right? Like a character name. So they have their ways of talking to each other that aren't regular. And if we find an account that, let's say we go through and we find all their accounts, and let's say we see a couple, or we see one that isn't so bad, they're not supposed to have it, rather than delete it, keep it there, monitoring it, because that's the only source of information you're going to have. So don't be so quick to delete it, because you want to know what's going on in their lives.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit, because that is, I think, a reaction of a lot of parents to delete and then all of a sudden take it away and say, you can't have this. And that's interesting that you just brought that up. So by doing that, then you have no source. And I would imagine they're just going to get sneakier and find another way to communicate.
They're going to find, there's billions of sites. They're going to find a way to still, if you look at their text messages on their iPhone and you notice that there isn't a lot of dialogue going on here, they're finding another place to talk.
They're sneaky.
You have to be investigators right now and see what they're looking at.
Yeah, I'll share this. And I am not breaking any trust with her, because she did a podcast episode with me talking about it. But we had taken social media from my daughter about 1.5 years ago, because we found a bunch of stuff and we decided to take it away. And then she went and got, she called it a trap phone. So they're sneaky. She had literally found a second phone to be able to use and was hiding that, which made me look at things differently. So I agree with what you're saying there, is to not take it away. You want to be able to track stuff.
Right. Wow. And if your teen is coming to you though, and telling you that they're depressed or they're anxious, obviously that's a good thing, but because they're not trying to necessarily impress you, that's not part of the trend. So that means that, okay, now they're bringing it to me. You want to get a therapist or any expert, because once you tell a therapist that your child, and especially if your child is depressed, and if you mention the word suicide ideation, that clinician or expert is liable now. You want them to be liable. The more they know, the less they're able to just walk away from it. And then you're not on that island by yourself, or feeling like you've got this level of responsibility and God forbid something happens. So you really want to bring as many experts involved in the situation as possible so they know what's going on.
So there's also an interesting thing happening right now where there are not enough therapists for the amount of people that need therapy. I don't know if you've seen that or you heard that, but I can tell you that it's real on my end. What can parents do that need help either with themselves on how to manage this or with their teens? What do they do when there's just a lack of therapists right now?
Right. And it's because all the therapists are treating all the parents, first of all. There are other modes, such as, even if it's talk therapy or I think BetterHelp, it's really not expensive.
Mm-hmm.
They have it set up where you can pay to have open text messaging with your therapist.
So this is like an app or something that you can do online. Is that what I'm hearing?
Your app, it's an online. It's okay. I think BetterHelp and talk therapy, and I'm sure there's probably more, but they have a completely different platform of just, you can pay for being able to text 10 times a day or what have you. So anywhere that you can find a site like that or a company like that, at least it's something for them, a place. Yeah.
Somebody to talk to that's not you as a parent.
Right.
Can we talk about some ways that parents handle things wrong? Because I do see this a lot too. And I'm going to ask you if it's right or wrong. My gut is that some of this is not the ideal way to handle, but like when I see a parent mad at their kids for doing these things, they're mad that they're anxious, they're mad that they're depressed, they're mad that they're self-harming, and they just start they're almost in trouble for doing that. What does that create? And what's the right way to be managing this?
Well, all kids are going to rebel. First of all, it's only going to feed into, if a child's truly depressed, all that does is feed into their beliefs that they are worthless, that they are, all of these things. So, and I think a lot of times parents will get frustrated and angry because when we're angry, that's helplessness because we don't know what to do. And so that's why it's important for parents, if you get to a point where you feel like you're frustrated or angry or whatever the case is, it's only feeding into the problem. But that's why parents should go to a therapist or go to, whatever their support group is, so that they can get to a good place, be calm about it, and be able, because our kids are feeding off of our anxiety and they're feeding off of whatever we're feeling. If we're out of control, if our behavior is erratic, the message that sends to them is, see, the world isn't safe. See, I'm not safe. My parents aren't in control of the situation. So even if a parent is anxious or angry, we've got to fake it till we make it. You don't want your kid to be sensing that, because it only further makes the world unsafe.
That's good. So we've got to be more neutral. We've got to be more stable and not have that reaction. I heard you on another podcast recently talking about how we shouldn't be making comments about their friends. If I heard that correctly, that by making comments about their friends, they take that personal because that's their friends. So they'll take that on themselves. I wanted to talk a little about that because that's something that comes up in parent discussions, is monitoring who they're friends with, or, being careful about who you allow them to be friends with. Can we talk a little bit about that and the right way and wrong way to handle that?
Well, you might as well be saying the same things directly to your child that you're saying about their friend, because they're identifying as like their friend. They're the same. So that's why the scariest thing you could tell a teen is they can't hang out with their friends anymore. You can't have this friend anymore. That's everything. If you remember when we were that age, that's your world is school and your friends. And that's your world, and that's all that exists. So they're going to hold on to that tight, and they're only going to turn against you in the long run, which doesn't help you.
So what do we do what does a parent do if they genuinely think a friend is not great for them? Like a friend is doing things that are going to put them in harm's way. Like what do you say or do if that's the risk that now they're going to take that personally?
Well, rather than try to get into a power struggle with your kid, if you have the kind of kid that you can, have that kind of conversation, this isn't a good friend, I think you need to, space yourself. If that works, great. If not, the only thing we can do is arm our children. And that's that ongoing dialogue of, what do you think is a healthy friendship? Or do you think this behavior or what your friend did, is that something you would do? Do you agree with that? and just having more of those conversations at the dinner table about integrity, doing what's right in spite of how we feel.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we're not basically telling them what to do or why it's wrong or scolding, but you're just opening up the conversation and basically facilitating or guiding a conversation so they can start thinking for themselves around that.
Right. Because if you think about when they graduate high school and they go out into the world, we're not going to be able to take away the bad people in their lives. So the best thing we can do is to arm them with as much healthy information and tools to be able to navigate and make good decisions for themselves as best as they can.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Do you think there is some hope? What do you predict is going to happen here? Because it's really interesting to me how so much of this is escalated with social media. And then last year with people not being in school and people being home more, it just seems like it really snowballed recently. Do you feel this is here to stay? I mean, do you think there's something on the other side of this?
I think it's just like, when Anna was the big thing. I think it's the same thing. It's just a matter of time. It's a trend. And eventually it won't be so popular, and there'll be something else that they'll gravitate. But the last thing I want to do is get in a power struggle with our team. Yeah. But we also have to have that balance. Certain things, we have to pick and choose. Certain things we need to change, but other things, hey, if your child wants to change their name or what have you, we really got to pick our battles, give them a little, but we also have to maintain and shed a little reality into their lives. When you turn 18, you can go out and you can, do whatever surgery you want to do, or you can do this, you can do that, but not until you're 18. But I'm more than willing to call you this name, and instead of your birth name, I'm more than willing to let you, dress in this certain way. Things that we're not going to agree with, but pick your battles. This trend, it's going to change, and it'll probably be. My prediction is, in another maybe 2 years, it's not going to be as popular to have a psychiatrist. Yeah, I can already see that trend starting to get to a low with the doom and gloom. And
it's so funny because when I was growing up, it was embarrassing to have a therapist. Like, you wouldn't tell anyone you were going to therapy. That was like, we would never say I have a therapist. It was like the family secret. You would keep it. Now it's almost you're the odd man out if you don't have it.
It's a badge of honor if you have a psychiatrist, because now you're in the group.
Wow.
But like I said, it's like if you read some of their conversation, it's a battle to see who can out depress the other person.
As a mom and a therapist yourself, what do you think about social media? Like, do you let your kids have it? Do you advise that your clients don't let their kids have it? What is your feeling on it?
I think it's the most dangerous thing in their lives, unfortunately, right now. I think, it could be a good thing. I mean, the internet was created for good reasons, but, there's always going to be, evil's always going to find a way to kind of step into anything that's good. I think that we have to go into our kids' phones and their computer settings, and we have to start blocking things, even though they're not going to like it. We have to really be in control and be diligent of what they're looking at on social media.
I've done it. So for those of you listening, it sounds scary. So I was of the mindset, like, I don't want to look because I don't want to know, but there's so much power in looking and knowing.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with their journals, like, we want to maintain that trust and those boundaries with our kid. But if we start seeing signs, then it's okay. And we need to go in and look at their journal. We need to be more diligent. We can't be worried about whether or not they're angry with us. If we start seeing any signs of anything, we have to go in and look, because whether they admit it or not, they need us to.
But I'm also hearing you say, when we do, it's not to get them in trouble or to scold. It's so we can be aware, and then we can help them get the help.
So we can be aware and get the help.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I repeated that again, because I think a natural reaction for so many parents is to react, and that could make things worse if it's not done.
Right. And that's why we can't take it personal.
Yeah.
We can't. If you read something that your teen has written, I hate mom, or I hate dad, or wish they were dead, 9 times out of 10, even with my own teen, she would say, Mom, I was 14. I didn't know what I was saying. Teens live in the moment. But if they're expressing something, unless you see in their journal that they're talking about suicide, or they're talking about some of those more serious things. Read it, and just take that into your own diligence to, start getting some help for them, or just having more conversations with them.
I have another question on a little bit of a twist on this topic, but I want to talk about body image a minute with teens, because when we were growing up, there was an awkward stage for teens. There's no awkward stage anymore. They all look like they're Kardashians, or they're comparing themselves online. Is that contributing to this? It's almost like they're forced to look older than they are younger.
Well, of course, it absolutely is, but it's either that direction, or it's the other direction in terms of identity. The transgender or non-binary.
Being confused about their gender, or wanting to switch that.
Right, because if you think, at age 14, kids are trying to figure out who they are. And if you look on social media, there's those particular trends, which is right now it's very popular, not to minimize anyone who really is, or you're going to have those kids that are, but it's very popular to be non-binary, be transgender, go by they and them. And then you look at the, not to bring the Kardashians, but you look at that body shape too. And it's just what's popular.
It's just confusing for teens, I would imagine too.
Yeah. Because when we were that age, we didn't have the internet.
No, we didn't know.
Unless we're looking at those, our mom's, Cosmopolitan or whatever, we didn't really have as much influence. So
I had the braces and the Dorothy Hamill hair, and I didn't.
I had headgear that went.
Yeah, I had that too. Like there was a very awkward stage. It's just that it seems like that's just gone away with teens. There's no awkward stage. They're in such a hurry to figure out who they are and grow up
and to belong.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this is good information here. Thank you so much for doing this. So I love those resources. I'm going to link those up that you mentioned about if you can't find a therapist, there are these online sites. I love that. I didn't even know about that. So that's amazing. While I've got you really quick, can you just touch a little bit about what EMDR is? Because I know people are going to ask, because I introduced you as that. And I mentioned that me and Brooks had done that. And can they even work with you on that?
They can. And so EMDR stands for eye movements, desensitization, and reprocessing. So essentially you're working with your subconscious mind. When we go to traditional just talk therapy, there's a reason why when we leave, we feel good for a day, maybe a week, until we get triggered again. And so we're not really changing anything core, changing responses, which means we got to find a therapy that works with the subconscious mind. And there's a lot of different therapies and new age therapies. EMDR is just one of them. It's one of the more accredited types. But if hypnosis worked, I think we'd all be cured. So what EMDR essentially does, in a nutshell, is it's pulling up an old memory for the sake of a belief that we have in terms of our responses in life. We have knee-jerk responses. If we don't get into the subconscious mind, the only way to change some of the way we respond to things, or triggers, or patterns of behavior, if we don't get into the subconscious mind, by the time we think to do something differently, we've already done it. The only way to change automatic responses, knee-jerk reactions, is by getting into the subconscious mind. So it's whatever that belief is that prompts that behavior, that response, or that trigger, or that fear. And we hold that together with where you might have learned that. Because when you think about it, when these beliefs form, beliefs are what prompt all of our actions and responses. We were a certain age, but we never think to pull that memory up and reassess it today. Is this a truth today when I think about this memory? And we reprocess it. EMDR includes a bilateral movement, though, and the difference is there's a reason why all this stuff is pushed in our subconscious mind, and that's because our conscious mind helps us out and helps us to do that. The bilateral movement is simply distracting your conscious mind long enough for you to pull that memory up to reassess, is this belief I'm not in control, I'm not capable, I'm not good enough, I can't succeed. Is this a truth today, or is it not? So essentially we're just pulling stuff up into your conscious mind and distracting your conscious mind, your little guard in your conscious mind, from pushing it back down. We just need to pull it up long enough. So the bilateral is just a distraction.
So good. I highly recommend it. And if I'm going to link up where you can find her in the show notes. But I highly recommend doing her intensive, because you go in for a week. It's what me and Brooks did. And you completely rewire that memory. And you have you have the memory, but you have a very different charge around it, which is amazing.
So you've noticed a difference then?
I totally did. And so did Brooks. Yeah. Now I want to go do it for other things. I'm like, how can I change the memory here with that?
And I don't want to get too personal, but have you noticed any specific responses to things that are different?
Yeah. So where I used to get triggered by certain behaviors, especially when it relates to my dad, like I don't have that charge anymore. So when I was in with Dr. Sarno, with Mcayla, she took me back to when I was a little girl, just some memories around that I like incidents that happened, like things that my mom would say to me or things that my dad said to me, and then the belief I formed around it. And that has completely changed. And I don't mind sharing this. It's not that personal. I've talked to my mom about it, but I had this very clear memory that you worked with me on. I had remembered my mom telling me that losing a kid, you can always replace a kid, but you can never replace your spouse. That was the memory I had. And I had this resentment towards my mom with that. And we did something in there. I don't even know what we did, but we talked about it, and it changed my memory about it, where there's like no charge around that with my mom. And to the fact that I've even had conversations with her about it. And she's like, that's not what happened. Like it was she had a whole different memory around it. Mm-hmm. So but I had this really sensitive thing with her that I had this belief that she thought that about her kids. And
what's the belief?
That we weren't important, that we were replaceable. Mm-hmm. So you helped me rewire that to a point where it's so neutral with me that I could then talk to my mom about it. And she had a whole different story around it.
Right. Because when beliefs form, they generalize from that point. Now we're not important in every situation. Now I can trust anyone. So I love that. I love that you've noticed that major change.
So what I think about EMDR right even now with the topic that we're talking about today is, for instance, if a parent is triggered, for instance, by something their kid's doing and they're making it, like, let's say their kid is honestly depressed, but it's triggering the parent, that I would imagine is probably from a charge within them, from a belief that they've been holding. Exactly. So that's something that EMDR could help them with, because you could figure out why you're getting triggered and charged by it, work on you, and then you show up differently for your child.
Right. And teens can get this too. I mean, even my own daughter has done some EMDR. They can do it as well. And it's just as effective. It, just depends. The way that's going to work with your teen, just as much as with an adult, is you have to feel like you have a good connection with your therapist. If you don't, it really affects it. It doesn't work. So it's important to find a match.
I agree with that, because I remember thinking, I was with you and I'm like, she dresses cute. She's someone I'd be friends with. I felt like you got me, and I felt safe with you. I mean, that was just my random weird thing with you. But I think that's important too. You want to make sure it's somebody you're comfortable with, that you feel that you can be yourself with.
And you feel that they get you.
Yeah. You feel that they get you. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I'll put information below on how you can find her and even work with her on EMDR or on her programs. So, and thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was good to see you.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen in as my guest today. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with friends and on social media. I don't advertise this show, so I rely on word of mouth and reviews to get it out in the world. The biggest thank you that you can give me is leaving me a review, and a nice one, I hope, by the way. This is how others find these episodes. If you do leave me a review, be sure to message me at support@nataliejillfitness.com with a screenshot of your review, because I would love to send you a free digital download of my DSR journal as a thank you. And please don't forget to connect with me on social media at Natalie Jill Fit on Instagram and Facebook.